What exactly is spiritual coaching? Now, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I know for a lot of people, there's a question about what it actually is, because like so many things in the coaching and self-help industry, there's no one definition. The challenge is that some people do view spiritual coaching as being quite woo-woo or too out there for application in all of life's situations and contexts. And other people see it through the lens of a particular faith or religion, which gives it a kind of flavor of religiosity, where the ideal is that people are taking on more of the teachings and precepts and concepts of that religion and applying them into their life, kind of embodying them more in their daily living. But neither of those views for me is particularly accurate. I think there's another way to look at spiritual coaching and its application in the coaching context that really applies across the board, because it really, at the end of the day, it's a humanistic approach that should be applicable in all coaching contexts, regardless of a person's faith or background. And that's the tricky piece. So I want to unpack that a little bit in this video and just spend some time talking about really then what is spiritual coaching, or at least one way to conceive of it that really makes it applicable, as I said, across the board in a wide range of coaching contexts. Hi, and welcome back to the Deep Coach channel, where we love to talk about all things related to the grand journey of awakening and transformation. And we look at it through the lens of the coach, but the reality is this is work for all practitioners of awakening and transformation, regardless of what you call yourself, because at the end of the day, we're looking to understand the patterns, processes, stages of human growth and human transformation, so that we can best, as practitioners, really position ourselves to support and uphold it in those people that we are working with. So if you're liking the content, be sure to subscribe or like this video. Now, the question is, what is spiritual coaching? And there's no easy answer for that. There's going to be a lot of different definitions in the marketplace, but I want to share with you the way I look at it, because I want to come at it from the pure coaching perspective. And in coaching, we understand that really we need to meet our client where they're at, and we're really about facilitating the kind of experiences and explorations of themselves that they are interested in having for themselves. And spirituality, we can just say, is an aspect of our humanity. You know, whether people believe in a specific thing or not, or whether they follow a particular religion or a particular philosophy, that's really less relevant. What's more relevant is to say, every human being that comes to the table in transformational work, because this is deep work, we're really beginning to explore kind of the essence of ourselves and those big questions about what life is and what's the purpose of life. Like when we're exploring that stuff, we're going to come into contact with a part of ourselves that feels very soulful, feels very alive at that level. There's going to be growth in what we might call the heart's intelligence. And for many people, that takes them into a kind of curiosity about their own spiritual reality. This is not something to be afraid of or to avoid as practitioners. You know, in fact, we want to be able to create spaces, if anything, where people can really open up to what's beginning to emerge in them as a truth, as a reality regarding their own spiritual existence and their own spiritual path and their own relationships with whatever they define spirit to be. So taking a step back for a moment, that's a really important point, is that the practitioner is not there to define anything for the client in that way. The practitioner's own spiritual background, religious background, is actually irrelevant in the conversation. What we're really there to do, and what makes coaching spiritual coaching, is simply when we are able to open up and create a space in which a person feels free to explore that existential side of themselves in any way that they desire to do that. Because I said a moment ago, and this is so key to understanding, is that when people go on deep journeys of awakening and transformation, regardless of their background, regardless of where they've come from, they're going to start to explore in some way those bigger questions about their spiritual existence. Like, who am I at the core? What is my soul feeling? What is my inner guidance telling me? What is my relationship with all that is? And again, they may define it differently. Like, what is my relationship with God or with spirit or with the divine or with Mother Earth or whatever it is that they're choosing to name? Like, these are really big questions that people on the transformational journey are going to want to explore with you, the practitioner. And so spiritual coaching really isn't so much that the coach or practitioner is doing something in particular that says that's spiritual in nature, though they might be, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it might be just more simply that they are comfortable creating a space and holding a space in which someone can really open up to those greater existential questions and explore them freely and safely, and begin to make decisions that really align with their emerging understanding of their spiritual nature. Now, if you think about it, that's really quite simple from a practitioner perspective. The work then is not to impose ways to think. And it's certainly not to bring our own stuff to the table and say, well, have you thought about it this way or that way? It's simply to create a space where we are comfortable being with another person's exploration of their spirituality, which may or may not include certain religious ideas. But if we're uncomfortable with that, if we have our own kind of barriers to exploring that in ourselves, if we have some very defined ways that we think about spirituality, about God, about the universe, that we have been conditioned to believe, that we have been taught to believe are true, and we're holding on to those tightly, it may make us very uncomfortable to sit with another person as they explore ideas, ideals, values, images that are contradictory to what we believe or bump up in some way against what we believe. And we might then either try to impose ways to think or even just subtly shut down the conversation, steering it away from that. So for me, again, just spiritual coaching, very simply, is the capacity to create a space in which another person feels free and safe to explore these great existentials of what's becoming in them, what's emerging in them, that we could say is of the spiritual realm and is of their spiritual nature. And for us to be able to do that openly, without any hesitation, so that that person can feel grounded in that work, that they're not feeling that they're bumping up against the practitioner's own ideas or ideals or value set. Because if that happens, that will close down. That will absolutely close down to some degree what that person is going to. And that topic may then not resurface because they're going to sense the discomfort from the practitioner in that moment. And if that topic doesn't have a chance to really be aired and spoken to, then we're actually putting a pretty significant barrier in a person's way to their own inner transformation, because transformation is inexplicably tied to the exploration of our deepest and truest nature, which, we can consider as, if we see ourselves as, let's say, soulful beings in this world, we might say, well, our unlimited nature is spirit. So if we're going to go there, we've got to be able to do it comfortably and naturally and in a way that people feel really safe and secure. And that really is as simple as it gets when it comes to spiritual coaching. It's not necessarily what the practitioner is doing, though it might be. Let me talk then a little bit about the qualities of the practitioner that support spiritual coaching. So if, for example, you are saying, well, I do spiritual coaching, then again, we have to be aware it's not about your own personal, spiritual, religious, or philosophical beliefs. That's just not it. Your clients are looking to explore their own understandings. So what does it need in you, the practitioner? Well, first of all, it needs you to be able to just drop your own stuff in that way. And for many people, that's difficult because they have such strong beliefs about the way life is, or the relationship of themselves to God, or the way that people should live their lives in accordance with certain religious ideals. And that strength of belief means that you, as a practitioner, really are not creating an open space for another person to safely explore. So one of the things you need to be doing is dropping all of that. There's really no place for it in spiritual coaching. And I know some of you are going to say, but that's not true. There is a place for it because that's who I am. It's like, yes, but you don't need to bring the actual thought patterns and dogmas and doctrines and that kind of thing to the table. What you need to bring is your spiritual nature. Like, that's all you need to bring to the table. So what I mean by that, and just as a simple example here, if I show up in a space as, let's say, compassion or forgiveness or peace or love, qualities that we could say are of spirit, and pretty much by any religious or philosophical background, those are wonderful qualities to be able to bring to the table and to offer to someone else. So let's say you're bringing the quality of presence of love or compassion or forgiveness. This is what you're bringing to the table. And you create a space, you could call it a coaching space, but let's just call it a space in which a person feels held within that energetic field. And they also feel free to truly explore and self-define and make their own meaning about their own spiritual nature. That is the optimal coaching position to be in. So it doesn't mean your spiritual nature is left behind. You bring the full soul self that you are to the table, but you do that energetically so that you're creating like a cocoon, if you will, or a space in which a person can feel that safety. If you can feel that they're being held in that way, and they feel safe to really open up to you about what they're feeling. So your spiritual nature has a mighty uplifting effect on other people. And that's the quality to it. So if you want to say that you're really a spiritual coach, one of the things you can consider is it simply means that you're bringing the fullness of your spiritual nature to the table, not the fullness of your spiritual ideas or belief patterns or dogmas to the table. Those can be left aside. Yeah. And the only caveat to that really is that if you are specifically saying, I only work with people who want to explore these very specific ideas that I hold about spirituality or religion or the way that life is, and if they want to explore the specific ideas that I hold that they too may share, you might call that spiritual coaching, but in reality, it's a little bit more like religious coaching than it is spiritual coaching. Because spiritual coaching doesn't need to have that woven into it unless the person brings it to the table. But from a practitioner perspective, really the ultimate stance is that you're able to create a space that is woven of your highest spiritual values and the energetic fields that they create so that another person can really explore their own life safely and freely with you. Who is spiritual coaching for? That's another big question that people ask. So I've met many people along the path of kind of training coaches over the years at the center that ask this question, like, what is it to be a spiritual coach? Yes, but also who's it for? Like who's drawn to it? So interestingly, the coaches or the practitioners that I find most attracted to doing spiritual work have long themselves been on some kind of a spiritual journey. And that could have been because of, let's say, the religious background that they grew up in, but it could also have been that they just simply went on a journey of seeking for themselves, seeking to understand their higher nature, seeking to understand their relationship with spirit in some way. And they were drawn to that journey and they've been on it and they've benefited from it. You know, they've benefited from the kinds of spaces that they were in, the conversations they had, the shifts in their own mind, the shifts in their own life experience. Like all of this can happen when people go on a deep spiritual journey and they want to offer that to other people. So they do. So interestingly, when we ask them, who's it for? Well, you can begin to see that very often the people who come for spiritual coaching are mirrors of the people who want to offer spiritual coaching. In other words, they may very much be seekers in their own lives. They're seeking to understand their own higher nature. They're seeking to bring more soul, more spirit, more of that energetic awareness to be present and alive in their own lives. They're seeking to make meaning of the world that they live in from a spiritual lens. So the people who come for it are very often mirroring then what the practitioners themselves have been through or possibly even still going through in their own journey of spiritual awakening and spiritual understanding. So it's a perfect blend in that way when what is being offered meets the need at a very core level. So keep that in mind when you think about who's it for, because some coaches say to me, well, I don't know if I want to be a spiritual coach or a transformational coach. I do find spiritual coaching to be, let's say, a subset of the bigger transformational picture. Like take transformational coaching as kind of the arc. There's a lot that can happen within the transformational realm because we're dealing a lot as well with the psychological aspect, like how the mind is making meaning of its world, as much as we are possibly venturing into the spiritual realm. When you do, let's say, spiritual coaching, you're really saying, like, this is what we're here to explore, this kind of subset of all the pathways of transformational work. We're really here to focus on your relationship with yourself at a spiritual level and your relationship outside with whatever you call it at a spiritual level, and beginning to understand that relationship and self-define it and put language and words to it, and ultimately be able to lift it. So if you're called to the path of spiritual coaching, keep that in mind, that you are possibly working in a subset of a bigger field. I mean, you can still do that, but I do also find that it limits what you can do with people, because not everybody is ready day one to be on a spiritual quest. Very often people who are on a transformational journey within themselves are awakening to something greater, are beginning to sense the stirrings of something at a soul level. But it doesn't mean that they're there that day. In fact, it could be months, maybe even years before they start to say, well, listen, you know what I really would like to talk about is something as it relates to my own spiritual nature and my understanding of spirituality in my life. I can sense it, it's present, but I don't really know it. That can take some time to get to. So by starting out as a spiritual coach, you may be limiting yourself because not everybody is quite ready for that. But at the same time, there is definitely a group of people out there who are actively looking at these kind of big questions and are looking possibly for someone, a practitioner like yourself, to be able to sit down and do the work with. Ultimately, I see the biggest benefit of spiritual coaching being that people are able to start living more authentically in that way. Because as we all know, for the most part, spirituality isn't something that we talk about every day. I mean, you can go around all day, every day, and really not talk about some of these essential aspects of our life experience. You may never talk about soul with your family. You may never talk about the ideals of living to your spiritual values. You may never talk about spiritual energy. You may never talk about the divine in your daily doings. Some people carry this stuff inside them quite deeply and don't actually have a place in which they can begin to express it openly and freely with someone who can simply witness it with them and help them make meaning of what it is that they're thinking about and questioning without imposing their own ideas upon that person who's the seeker. So this is the piece that I can't emphasize enough, is that when you are working with people who are seeking answers to these existential questions, if you start imposing an agenda, if you start suggesting ways to think for people, if you start saying, well, have you thought of it this way or this way or this way, because that's the way that you think about it, that may at first appear to be quite helpful. But in actuality, it's a bit like putting speed bumps on the road. People are often, for the first time in their life, in these journeys of transformation, beginning to self-define what is real, true, and good for themselves. And that means they're learning to listen to their own inner truths and their own inner understandings and to really bring that forward. So of course, if you're saying to them, well, as a more advanced spiritual practitioner, I suggest that you look at it this way, or have you thought about it that way, or this is what it actually means. This is how we define these different things: soul, spirit, God, all of that. You're actually putting a speed bump on the road on someone else's transformational journey, because what they're doing is they're again listening to an external source for guidance and validation, when what you really want to be doing as a spiritual practitioner, spiritual coach, is helping a person really land in their own truth. That is the biggest gift you can give to someone, where they can begin to self-define for themselves. And that doesn't mean they don't go out in the world and start to read books or attend webinars or listen to videos about how other people interpret spirituality and how other people make meaning of it, because there's a vast world of it out there. And of course, the seeker is going to be taking a lot of that in. That's the nature of the seeker. So it might seem that your own opinion, your own ideas is just adding to this plate of the seeker's understanding. But from a coaching perspective, that's not our role. Because all you're doing then is adding to. What you want to be doing is instead helping them make meaning of, integrating it into their life, beginning to express it more. Because I said they may not be talking about this with anybody else. They just want to give voice to these ideas and ideals, and to do it in a way that they can begin to make some meaning of it, to begin to align to some of those ideas, to begin to behave in accordance with some of the ideals that they are, again, taking in. So the role of the spiritual coach is not to make meaning for the person, but to help the person make meaning for it for themselves, to integrate it into their lives, and to begin to live it in ways that are truly meaningful, that help uplift them, that expand their spiritual sense, that allow them to live freely in that way, in a way that they want to in this world. No more hiding it, no more, like keeping it closeted away from what the world might think of me if I show this part of myself, but to live freely in it, to radiate it. This is the work of the spiritual coach, the spiritual practitioner, in supporting other people in what we could call spiritual coaching. And trust me, like I do this work all the time, and I absolutely love it. To watch someone else flower into their own truth around spirit is an extraordinary thing to witness. And to know that all I've really had to do is create a space in which they're free to talk it through, for me to just simply help them connect dots, make meaning, and then begin to take action on that. You watch people flourish at the core level. You watch their soul come to life. You watch them begin to radiate a kind of light of being and purpose that they may never have experienced, and you may never have seen in them until that begins to happen. So don't ever hesitate from doing this beautiful, beautifying work with other people. It not only transforms people, it transfigures people, which really is to help beautify them at a core level of mind and being, so they become a little more radiant in the world, living more lightly, more freely, and certainly unabashedly in the realm of spirit. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you in the next video.